Are you a business owner that is considering selling your business to private equity? Well, if so, I want to warn you, it's not always as good as it might be made out to be. In this video, I talk about 5 specific areas why you should not sell to private equity. Before we get into it, I just want to offer a disclaimer of sorts. Selling your business is, for a lot of people, not going to be a fun process. It can take a long time. There are a lot of ups and downs. There's a great deal of uncertainty. It's a period of time where, as the business owner, you've always known everything about the business and you've been there, done that, so to speak, and selling your business, you likely haven't. For most people, they'll never sell a business. And for those that have, they'll probably only sell one business. So it's a very turbulent time and it can be very stressful. In terms of the first reason why I would say not to work with private equity is because private equity, I would say, is a sophisticated buyer. They have their own processes, they have their own procedures, they have their own way of analyzing a deal and whatnot. So in this regard, they're going to expect certain financial packages, monthly financials, monthly balance sheet, understanding of working capital, understanding of what the growth drivers are. In order for them to get through their process, through their investment committee and whatnot, they're going to need a nicely bundled package. And if you're not able to provide the different pieces of data and understanding of the company to them, then it's going to result in a rocky process. And that doesn't mean that the private equity firm will step away. That's just might be one more thing that lengthens the process and or decreases the certainty of a close. Another reason not to work with a private equity buyer is that private equity buyers are going to be more risk averse than strategic buyers or perhaps other types of buyers. What do I mean by that? I think the best way to describe it is to use the analogy of selling a used car. Let's say that you've had this car and your neighbor really likes the car and he's like, you know what, whenever you sell that car, I want to buy it from you. And whenever you get ready to sell it, you start talking and he's like, well, how often have you done the maintenance? And you say, well, yeah, I think I've kept up with it. Well, do you have the maintenance logs? Well, no, but I usually get an oil change every few thousand miles or whatever. And so your neighbor now is presented with some uncertainty and some risk. They can't see how well the car has been maintained. And so their view might be, well, I can't pay you as much money because I don't know how good of a condition your car is really in. So I still want to buy it, but because there's uncertainty as to the health of the car, I'm going to have to offer you a little bit lower money. Now, another option might be sell to a dealership. They're going to have all the service records and they're going to know that regardless of how often you've gotten an oil change or whatever, the car is going to last a long time and they might be able to offer this price. Even though it might not be apparent, that's a good description of what happens whenever private equity firms look at other businesses. As a potential buyer, there's no way I know the business as well as you do. Compare that to a strategic buyer that's in the same industry. They'll also have that long-term knowledge and expertise about the industry, and they might even know you from your reputation of being in the industry for a long time. And so for that reason, they might be willing to pay more. Another negative of a private equity buyer, at least for some people, will be that most private equity buyers have a 5 to 7 year investment horizon. Now, I realize that to some degree, I think you're making the argument that once you sell, it's up to the new owner as to how long they will own that. But I know from talking to some business owners that that's a very big red flag in terms of selling to private equity, because they've owned this business for 30 years. They don't want to see it sold again in 5 years. That just doesn't feel right to them. Another big potential negative to sell to private equity is that it's definitely going to result in a change in the culture. Now, for some folks, this will be a positive change to culture. For some folks, it'll be a negative change. It's really very personal. The first one, though, is I would say it will definitely be a less freewheeling type of culture. It's going to become a more buttoned up type of culture. even though maybe you didn't do some of the safety things because your employees didn't want it or got in their way or hurt productivity, that's not really going to fly, at least in my experience, after private equity buys the company. But really, it's about creating a company that feels more mature, that feels less like a mom and pop and more like a company that can be absorbed into an even larger company or can grow into an even larger company. I would say the second very likely change to culture is that there will be a defined focus on growth. Whereas in the past, I think that growth was probably a goal to some degree. My perspective is that growth is going to be front and center. And we're not talking about 5% revenue growth. I mean, we're talking about, okay, how can we double or triple this company in 3 years? Not only is that going to result in a change in strategy, but it's going to result in a change in the culture as well. I mean, not everybody gets excited about that level of growth because it's going to require change. The final potential negative of selling to private equity is that it's almost a certainty that the private equity firm will put some debt on the business. Now, some people are okay with debt, some people think the worst thing ever. And we've been in situations where we're talking to sellers and their mindset is, no, we don't really want to sell to you because you're going to put debt on the business. Because, debt feels burdensome and it presents risk. What if you can't make the debt payments and whatnot? But, how we run businesses, that's part of the deal, so to speak. We're not going to, unless in very rare circumstances, fund a deal entirely with equity. If we fund a deal entirely with equity, then it's going to be much harder to get the types of returns we're looking for. But also, we're not trying to lever this thing as high as it will go, not at all. I mean, we're trying to apply what we think would be a healthy, moderate level of debt. So what would that level be? Probably be somewhere in the 1.5 to 3 turns of debt. So for example, if your company is throwing off $5 million of cash flow, 1.5 times that might be 7.5. 3 times might be 15. So on that size of company, you might be looking at anywhere from 7.5 million of debt to 15 million of debt. There's plenty to service that debt, and that would be a prudent capital structure for that deal. Now, I don't know if you thought those features of selling to private equity were positive or negative, or you're just thinking really the only negative was how boring the guy that was talking was. Joking aside though, if that makes you think differently about selling your business or you'd like to learn more, let me know. This is what I do, and I like having conversations about businesses and growth opportunities and whatnot. So please let me know. I'd love to hear from you.
I didn't do it! Okay. Everybody just calm down.